Welcome everyone to this Flex webinar. Today we are talking about quote building best practices. I am your host, Marcus Merritt. Now I do want to highlight that today I am not going to cover all of the basics of building quotes. I'm going to cover a lot of basics, but mostly the things that I feel like are best practices. And I'm going to try to highlight some tips and some tricks to help you get things better, faster, cleaner, those sort of things. Okay. So let's go ahead and dig in. Over here, we just see our desktop when we first log in. So in here, when I go to build a quote in this, now, one other thing I do want to highlight really quick is that in the default Flex system, the primary financial document is referred to as a quote. There are many of your systems that has been changed to something like estimate or proposal. That's perfectly fine. That to me is still always one of the great things about Flex is how adjustable it is for your company's needs and what you need to do. I'm going to refer to everything as quote, but just remember if yours is estimate, yours is proposal, everything else should be generally working the same. Okay, so we're going to go up here and create a new quote. We're going to get our pop-up menu of information. Again, I'm only going to highlight a few of the key things. I do want to make a brief mention on the name. So the name is just a text box. We can type whatever we want in here. But I do highly recommend that as a company, you have an internal discussion about some sort of system or pattern that you put to your naming mechanism to keep that consistency among your company and any different salespeople who are putting in quotes, so that you have that consistency of what's going on. And some people aren't naming one way and some people aren't naming the other. I'm not going to give an example because I don't want to try to say like I know the best pattern. I just want to say that I do think having a discussion and deciding a pattern for you internally is a good practice, something that I would highly recommend. Okay. The next thing I really want to focus on is our two dates in here, which in this system are called prep date and return date. Again, this is a field that is commonly renamed, something like ship date, deprep date, prep, deprep, lots of different things. Again, nothing wrong with that, whatever makes most sense for your company and where you're going. The key on these is in the default system, these are required because these are the only dates that Flex is using to do math, to figure out the conflicts and availability of your equipment, okay? As we see down below, we've got some other dates in here, but those are not set as required because those dates are for your information dates. They're just to kind of post some information, share some things, but Flex is really doing important math on these dates. So they're very critical. Now, they're especially critical to make sure you're understanding what the availability of your equipment is actually like for this event. And so I want to give a few examples of what you might do for this to help that to be as accurate as possible. Okay, so the first example, what I'm the most used to, we have an old school corporate event. Okay, we are taking our equipment, we're loading it on a truck, we're driving to some place and we're setting it up on the next day or in a few days because it's out of town, those kind of things. Okay, but we have to remember that in this scenario, even if we're saying it's local, but it's a morning setup, a morning load in, we're probably, packing the truck. Let's even say it sets up on Saturday, okay? We're loading the truck tomorrow. We're not likely coming in at 5 a.m. and loading the truck on Saturday. And so that's why this system defaults at a 4 p.m. time saying, yeah, I don't have to have it loaded first thing in the morning tomorrow, but I do need to have the gear on the truck by end of regular business. I'm not likely to want to come in late at night to load that truck. Okay. In the same way, let's just say it's an event over the weekend, Saturday, Sunday, maybe just Saturday. But, my guys don't really want to come in on Sunday. I'm going to come back in and take care of it on Monday. So I do that. But I don't want to assume that that gear is going to be unloaded from the truck and put away right at 8 a.m. That's not very likely. So what I like to do is to give some leeway, but make sure that this time does not cross over this time, so that if I had one event yesterday and one event tomorrow, I feel like I probably can turn that gear today and make it available. But if one was done last night and one loads in this morning, unless I really have to, I want to avoid sharing that equipment if I can possibly do it. Okay, so that's that scenario of we're loading a truck, we're going somewhere else. Now we're going to think of some other kind of events. Let's say instead, a lot more common these days, you have something in your in-house studio, your virtual space that you've built in your space, and a customer has scheduled to come and use that. Okay, well maybe then what you're instead doing is thinking of when is it that we have to start setting up the final pieces for this show, the few things that are slightly different for this customer than just our base setup, okay? So maybe that customer is going to set that up to do that tomorrow afternoon. And so you could then say, well, we can do that final setup at 8 a.m. We can start doing that first thing in the morning. That would be perfectly okay. Okay, it would just be how much time do you feel you need? Sometimes it would still be, I want an extra day so that we're checking things, setting it up, doing a lot of extra testing before the customer shows up. Sometimes you only need a few hours, okay? So that would be another example. If it's in your space, but you have to do some final setup, some final additional little things specific to that customer's needs, okay? And then the other example that I want to kind of give is that dry rental. Okay, someone's going to come and pick up something, or you had planned to deliver something for a customer, but you're just giving them equipment and then the equipment will come back. Okay, again, in that, you're thinking about when do you want that equipment to first be considered available? If it's for pickup from your warehouse, again, maybe they're planning to come pick it up tomorrow, midday sometime, but you're like, hey, anytime after 9 a.m., you can come pick it up. That's fine. That's what we're going to say is available. And that's your commitment to be ready by that time. Okay. That means you may still pack it and prep it tonight, but you don't have to consider it ready until tomorrow. Okay. Opposed to if they say they want it delivered, well, then you have to do in that same example of, is it a lot of gear and we're going to pre-pack it, or is it not a lot and I can do that example of it's a 30-minute drive and we're going to load it on the truck just before we leave, and so we're going to say that it has to be available at 8 a.m. Okay, so that's just kind of some of those examples. It's really important to make sure you're not thinking on that example of a load-in that's in, in another city, that the gear is only unavailable as of the load-in because it's going to sit on a truck for a day and a half getting to wherever you're going, and you can't use it on some other event during that time. So it's important to keep all those dates and times in mind and not just think of the load in and load out of the event, okay? But again, lots of different scenarios. It's just important to really think, when is this gear actually going to be unavailable, not when is it going to be in use, okay? I just want to make a really brief mention of department. In this system, it says Department 1, Department 2. A lot of customers also turn this field off, and there is nothing wrong with that, okay? The key on this, I just want to highlight, is department is a field that can help you to do some organizational things and some filtering, okay? This, for a lot of customers, you could be a thing between, I want to separate and have a better understanding between my dry rental and my live events, between my, old school regular corporate events and my new virtual or hybrid events. I want to get a better understanding of how we're doing, how that balance is landing on things. Those are the kind of things that department can provide for you. And so I just recommend kind of think about that, have a discussion internally. If you're not using them and you can see some value, let us know, we can assist with that, or you can be able to see one of the other videos on the Help Center, and it'll explain how to update your departments in the system. And for the moment, those are the only things I really want to highlight in our initial creation. So we're just going to go ahead and say okay and create this. The next thing I always recommend is when you first create is to take a moment and just review the header information. It's going to pop up right there. Just take a quick prep and look through. The biggest things in this that I highlight is that you should look at terms, tax rule, and discount. These are fields that are very critical, but we're not in our initial form that we were filling out to create this. We also have shipping method and customer PO. There's a little less chance we know all of that information at this initial point, but we probably have a better idea what our terms are right now, especially right now. A lot more of your customers, you're running on, we need deposits or we need everything in advance. Make sure you're following those proper terms. Double check you're following your appropriate tax rules. That'll make your accounting department happy. Or discount you may or may not be giving to people is also fine. I do want to highlight one other thing. In this system, and in a lot of systems that I have worked with, I turned on the status field here in the header. I've been for a long time a big proponent of making sure that any person who's looking at a financial document or any project is aware of that. And the developers have taken that into account. And so now the status always shows up here in the header with the name, where it has the name, the number, and the status. And so as you get to where you're working more in Flex 5, if you're intentionally still not printing this to the customer, you're using it as an internal notification, you may be able to turn this off and get yourself to just rely on this field here because it's the exact same information, okay? So that's that key there. So next I want to start talking about the details of building Moat and getting information in. And the focus here is in talking about our drop modes, okay? The drop modes here. Again, this may seem basic for some people, but I want to highlight some best practices relative to this. So first, we're going to talk about auto, okay? What auto does, I'm going to open our inventory section, is it automatically creates subtotals based on the top level folder in our hierarchy, okay? So if I go in here and say I'm going to have some speakers, and I say I want 4 of these VRX, we'll see that that creates a subtotal called audio, okay? It also properly respects that hierarchy. So if I go in here and say, oh, I wanted some microphones, and I say I'm gonna put 2 microphones on this show, they show up in that same audio subtotal, but underneath the speakers because microphones are below speakers. But then if I say, oh, well, I need a console for this, so I'm gonna go get this console and I need 1 of those, it properly again respects that and it throws it in the middle of this, in between, because that's where it is in the hierarchy, okay? Similarly, it respects the global hierarchy. So let's say I go in here and I say I'm gonna do some drape and I want some linear feet of pipe and drape, let's say 30 feet. In here, that's gonna pop up my suggestions. For the moment, we're going to assume that that is accurate. That's not what we're focused on today. And we'll see that that put the drape below audio because that's where it is. But if I then go back up to video and realize that I'm going to have a projection screen and I put that, and again, you see with auto, it doesn't matter where I'm dropping it. I can drop it down low, I drop it like it's going into one of these other folders. And even here, you'll see it sort of for a minute thinks it's doing this. If I say, oh, we're gonna have 1 screen, but once it finishes processing, it goes, oh, I was in auto. That now goes into a new subtotal called video. That video subtotal is after audio and before drape because that is where it lands in the hierarchy, okay? Now, with that, the next quick thing I just really want to highlight to remind people that as you start to quote things and it puts in, especially if they have packages, they have accessories, you know, that you're going to start to lose a lot of your space to all these accessories, okay? You can always individually close these things, but I do want to highlight, remind, if anybody's not aware, if you click the description header, it will collapse everything or uncollapse everything. Okay, and that collapsing is always what we're wanting to do. And then if again I need to dig in and look at more details in the audio, I can do that. But now we see that the other subparts are collapsed because I don't need to be reminded these details of my speakers. I just need to be reminded how many speakers have I planned for this event. Okay, so that's the key we're worried about right now. Okay, so that's that key with auto in here. Now I want to also highlight that if we go and do services, it operates the same way. If I go in here and say I need an audio engineer, it will create a subtotal called labor because that is the top level folder here. And then if I add in that I needed a video technician, it will also add that person to the labor and it goes below because the video technician is after audio in this current hierarchy. Okay, it would work the same if we added any other groups, but I think we have the kind of point of that. Okay. Next with this is, you know, that works great if it's a fairly basic show or it's a large show that we're expecting to have kind of all the major parts and pieces of an event. And so you want to divide up, you know, your audio, your video, your whatever. But for a lot of companies that either operate differently or for different kind of events, you may not want your subtotals to automatically be named the same as your, you know, organizational tools. okay? So my personal favorite way to do this is to change to the add mode, okay? The add mode, what it does, and I'm gonna open this one total to show it, is no matter what item, I'm gonna go back to video and I'm gonna put in a breakout room package. Let's go these details, sure. It doesn't matter if I drop it down below or I drop it up in this label or if I drop it somewhere up here, it is going to go to the bottom of the list outside of any existing subtotal, okay? Down here. Okay, now again, I was talking about, well, we want to make special subtotals, but I just added this item that didn't go into any subtotal, okay? The reason for this is what we can now do is I can now select these line items and I can create a custom subtotal and they will go into it, okay? Now I want to highlight a few things about how to select those. I can select all of the items, and then if I deselect each subtotal, you'll see that it deselects all the items inside of it. That does, or whether or not it's open or closed, it would deselect all of them, okay? So that is a method, but a great new method right now, because that would require me to select all and then deselect 4 different subtotals here. So that's what 6 clicks on it. So a new great method I want to highlight is if we want all these to be, I can click here and then I can shift click the bottom one and it will select everything in between. Okay, so now I have all those items that I want to go into my new custom subtotal there. So then we go over to the right, we pop out our modify menu, and we can say create subtotal, and I'm going to say that this is breakout room 1, and we have the ability to add separate discounts or dates. We're not going to change any of that for today. We're going to say save, and we'll see that all of those items went into the so for whatever reason, that thing decided to pop itself up to the top of the list rather than being at the bottom, which is where I wanted it. And so I do want to highlight an important thing, that you can drag and drop items or entire subtotals or packages of gear around a quote. Once they're on there, if you realize that's not exactly the order you wanted them, maybe the order they're stored in the hierarchy wasn't quite perfect, but it was close, you want to do a minor movement, all you have to do is go to the line of the item or subtotal you want. And this first column where you see those 6 dots, and you see when I put the cursor, it changes to the hand. That's where I can grab, I refer to that as the handle, and I can drag and drop that to wherever I want it to go. Well, and there we go, I've dropped it down to the bottom of the list, which is where I wanted it in the first place. Okay, so that's that highlight there. Now, similar to if I was operating in that kind of drag and drop, I can go to the insert mode if I then realize, oh, you know what, I need some additional item in here that was not already in there. I need some drape in my breakout room. And so I'm going to change it to insert. I'm going to go to my pipe and drape, and then I'm going to be able to put it exactly wherever I drag and drop it, okay? Wherever I put it. Now, I do also want to highlight that if I want to put it in here and I'm not as concerned about the order, or I'm planned for it to be at the very bottom, you see that if I put there, it highlights very clearly that it's drop inside, okay? The thing is, when that happens, it will always go to the very bottom of the list. So if I know I want it to be here right before the tech, then I need to do that manually. But I can do that to any of these without opening them, or if this one was closed, I can grab it, I can drag it here, say drop inside, and then say, oh, I needed 20 feet. Again, we're gonna assume we're just 20 straight feet. We don't need to tweak that. And so it sees it kind of popped it open, put it in, closed it back up. If I open it back up, we'll see it's in here. But as I said, it is at the very bottom. So if that's not where I actually wanted it, I need to go in here and then move it so that it sits above the tech as I was planning. Okay, so that's kind of just a couple keys there. So I'm a big fan of using auto or add for my initial quote creation, but you'll always end up needing to do some inserting later and some moving of items later to tweak things to be exactly to your liking. Okay, so that's kind of the key things with those different drop modes. With that, I want to highlight a couple other secrets, a little other tips. The one nice thing here with this, where I did this breakout room, is maybe I have for this event, I have 5 breakout rooms that essentially are the same, but the client wants them named separately. So then I'm, very clear on, I understand which room they're actually in. Okay, would have actually had it in the room. Okay. A great thing that I can do for that is I can build the first one, and whether collapsed or uncollapsed, I can take this and I can copy the line. If I copy the line on an entire subtotal, it copies the entire subtotal. Okay. Then I can go back to that line and paste it. And subtotals cannot go inside of subtotals, so it goes below it. Okay. Now it is still named breakout room 1, because it's a perfect copy, but I can then click on this to edit the subtotal. I can go in here and say, oh, well, this one now is 2, and say save. And now I have 2 duplicate ones, but one is named the same way as the other, so that we kind of have that ability. If there was a 3rd or a 4th or a 5th, I can continue to paste items in there. Okay. Other great with that same kind of example is maybe for something, you're trying to be really clear on the labor schedule. And so you're not just putting in there that you're going to have 5 guys work for 3 days. You're trying to say this is Monday's call, this is Tuesday's call, this is Wednesday's call, etc. Okay. For that, you can utilize a similar thing. Now, I tend to find this works better on insert rather than on add, and I'll show you why. So for this, I like to create the subtotal first. It does take a little more effort, but we can then right at the beginning, before we put anything in, we can say this is Friday labor, say for this example. And we say, okay, that is going to be on the 21st at 8 a.m., but then they're only going until the 21st at p.m. Okay, that's our actual call for Friday's labor. We do that, pops it here at the bottom. And now I can go to my services and I can get my audio engineer. I can say, hey, drop inside of this. And that call time will automatically grab that date and time rather from the global time. Okay. I could then also put in my video technician in there. And so now I have those. If I had 3 or 4 or 5 more guys, we can do that. Okay. So it's properly understanding those dates, times. Okay. Now, if I need to also do it for Saturday, and I had a lot of guys, I can do the same thing where I can copy this line. I can then paste it. It's going to give me a new one called Friday, still with the exact same dates. And I can then go in here and edit it. And I can change the name to say, Saturday, and I can push both of these forward. And then it will also override all of these dates inside. Now, obviously, there could be some time change as well, but that's just showing another quick way where you can use that same kind of copying and pasting to quickly manage a lot of different labor options in the same kind of way. Okay, so those are the key things I wanted to highlight as far as the insert and kind of a little bit about the ability to copy and paste, rename the subtotals, things like that. Okay. So before we push to some bigger picture things, one key thing I do want to remind that's really nice is we've talked a bit about suggestions and packages in some past webinars, so I don't want to dig into that too detailed. But let's say in this example, the customer came back and, we've changed the design, and so now you're going to need more pipe and drape, but also the whole design of it is changing and you're going to need different legs and whatever. So first you can come in here and say, oh, well, now we need 50 feet. Okay. This is going to keep an understanding of the ratio and try to guess that ratio in there. If that ratio is wrong, you can just manually update these numbers. But let's say instead this example was a suggestion where you had some other item that you didn't even add before and now you need to add because of the change. You had some short crossbars available and you didn't add them. You can go manually get them, but I want to remind you can go to the menu of that line that has the suggestions and you can pop the suggestions back up to go get additional items. Now, again, in this, I had already listed all of these items. And so if I actually say, yes, I want to put some more panels, it is not going to update the existing line. It's going to add a second line on there. So that's important to note. But again, this is if there is something in those suggestions that I had not added before, I can go in there to get it faster rather than having to go find the item in my hierarchy and do an insert and dragging and dropping it here. It also then makes sure that it follows the understanding of those suggestion rules, where in this example, they're all set as accessories. We're trying to hide them and not change the pricing on anything. We're just, making sure we're getting the details for our staff. Okay, so that's just another kind of key thing that I want to remind people, is that suggestions are really powerful, and it's good to remember that we can always then pop them back up to have access to them again. Okay, so now we have our quote here. We have kind of some of the baseline things, but now the company has come to us and said, oh, we're going to plan this party and we want a quote for that. Well, we can obviously just continue to add rooms. Right now, we've kind of done a general session and some breakout rooms, and that's maybe a little more messy than we want. But we realize, no, we really would rather have that on a separate quote because we think it's a little more iffy that we're going to win that. So we want to do that. When we want to have 2 or more quotes for the same project, the same job, we want to have an event folder. Now, in this case, we didn't know ahead of time that was going to be the case, so we didn't make an event folder, and that's perfectly fine. So I want to focus on how we make it after the fact, and then I'll show you how to, if we've done it beforehand or if we then add to that. So in the same way, we're creating a new project, any kind of thing, whether it's a quote or an event folder, we're going to our top right, this plus, and in this case, we're going to say I want to create a new event folder. Okay. We're again going to do this. This is our, we're going to change this to say job building best practices in here. And we're going to set our dates and times. We're again going to say that it's there to there, but it is actually starting at 8 a.m. That's what I have on the other one. We can, filter in these. I haven't added client or venue. I don't get into too much of that. There's not as much of a focus on specific best practices in there. So we're going to create this document, okay? Once we have created this, we can now go back to our first quote and we go into, again, our modify menu, and this near the bottom here is to move. We can then move this item. When you do this, you pop it up. It's first going to highlight if it currently has a parent, what is that parent? If it doesn't, it's going to be blank, okay? We can then click the magnifying glass to go search. And so I can say, oh, well, I know that this is called job building best practices. Within this, if your numbers are big, you can do some filtering. We have this great new addition of you can make it show root elements only. So it wouldn't show you the pull sheets, to manifest, the other things that maybe had been created. It would just show you those top level things, which for most of you would be event folders, but could show quotes with a similar name that do not have event folders. But that highlight, but this is what we want. So we're going to go ahead and double click, or you can click it and say, okay. It's going to remind us this is where we're moving it. Are you sure that's what? Yes, and say, okay. And so now it's been moved inside of it, okay? And we can double check that by going to the top icon here, and that's going to register our project tree. It's the same thing if we go back to the event folder, it's reminding us our project tree. Now we see on that depending on which of those I'm on, we see it's the same thing, but this is clicking to highlight, use coloring to highlight, to show us which project we're actually on. Now with one event folder and one quote, well, that seems really easy to understand. But once a job starts getting really packed with lots of quotes, lots of different options, it gets complicated, and it's really nice to have that key reminder of this is the one that you're currently looking at. So then if you're looking for the pull sheet for this one, you're making sure you're finding the correct one. Okay, so now in this example, if it's either I made my event folder beforehand, or I'm going to make my event folder, I made my event folder after, but I now need to add my additional quote. It's just a reminder that we go to our bottom here, add child elements, and then we can add child elements directly to this. And this, I'm going to add a quote. We'll see, depending on the settings you have, that it's copied over this information. Now in this, I'm going to make my, just to tag a little thing to say that this is for the party that we're talking about on that. If I had another of these fields, they may or may not have copied over, depending on what I had put in and what my system settings are. We can have most of them inherit and kind of copy across. I didn't fill them out, so we're not going to see, but we do see, the dates, the name, that kind of is automatically copied across there. So we're going to go ahead and say, okay, in the creation at there, And now we have a new blank quote that we can get to building. Right here, we see this popping up this. That's the positive because in our system, we can paste within the same element types. So I can go back to my main quote and say, well, I'm going to use a very similar audio system. So I just want to go over here and I want to copy this line and I want to go back over here and I want to paste my copied lines in here. And there's my same audio system, okay? I can use that to save time. You can also use that to go to existing quotes. Oh, I like what I did on that quote the other day. I just want to use that in this quote. I can go open it, copy it, paste it into my new quote, that sort of thing, okay? The next relative to that is we can do a similar thing with entire quote documents. So let's say on this, we put it out there and the customer came back and said, well, we're thinking of doing this change. Can you give us a different? And you're not sure that it's worth just changing it because you think they're going to go, oh, never mind, go back to the original. So you'd rather provide them 2 versions, however you title them, whether it's version 1, version 2, gold, silver, whatever things, okay? We can do that. Real quick, I want to show that if I reload this and I look at my element tree, we'll see that now I have my event folder and my 2 quotes, and it's reminding me which quote this one is, okay? So in that, we're going to say that they want another revision of this, okay? So maybe in that then, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to first edit my header and I'm going to go in here and call this one V1, okay, for version 1. And then I'm going to go and say I want to copy this quote. Now, using this copy quote feature is common for 2 things. This versioning that I'm talking about, where you want to have a couple different versions, or the customer says, hey, we're going to do our Joe, it's the exact same as last year with just these couple minor changes. And you're like, well, let me go grab last year's quote and copy it forward. So it's just important to make sure we're reviewing this where if it's a version, the dates and times are going to be the same. If it's next year, you're going to go in here and you're going to jump it forward a year, okay? It does always add this copy of with the name, and it tags in here the number of the quote that it was copied from, okay? If you want to keep it there to remind yourself, that's great. If you want to remove it and then change that to V2 and then get rid of the copy of, and that's what I want for this example, that's great. We'll see here that it says it's going to go into the same folder, and obviously, again, if we're doing from last year to this year, we would say, no, don't put it in that folder. Either you've made a new folder, you're going to make a new folder, or there's no plan for a folder and you can just get rid of that. For this example, we want it to stay in here. So we're gonna then just go ahead and say, okay, on that. Okay, and we'll see there that that has us an exact same thing. And so now we could go in here and we can make some adjustments. Maybe they're saying, they're gonna, start in on Saturday. We find out that we don't have access to the room on Friday, some other things, whatever changes we may need to make, we can then go make, and then we can send the customer full versions in that, okay? So those are overall the key things that I really wanted to focus on, sort of best practices and a couple tips and tricks to really help you in your process to build your quotes quickly, make them clean and organized, and to be able to be efficient with your time in doing this. With that, again, thanks everybody for showing up. As always, if you have additional questions, please reach out to support@flexrentalsolutions.com. And if you have ideas of topics you would like us to cover in these webinars, please reach out to training@flexrentalsolutions.com. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next time.